Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sabir, pronouns he, him, and I run events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Ricky Tucker's new book, and the category is Inside New York's Vogue, House, and Ballroom Community, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until, after over 94 years, the Strand is a sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers, booksellers, and authors, we wouldn't be here today, and we truly appreciate all of you. Tonight, we are thrilled to have with us Ricky Tucker for a discussion of his new book, and the category is. Ricky Tucker is a North Carolina native, a storyteller, an educator, a lead creative, and an art critic. His work explores the imprints of art and memory on narrative and the absurdity of the most fleeting moments. He has written for the Paris Review, the 10th Magazine, and Public Seminar, among others, and has performed for reading series including The Moth Grand Slam, Sister Spit, Born Free, and Spark London. In 2017, he was chosen as a Lambda Literary Emerging Writing Fellow for Creative Nonfiction. You can connect with him at www.thewriterrickytucker.com. Joining Ricky in conversation is Twiggy Pucci Garçon. With a Southern upbringing, Twiggy is a proud non-binary member of the LGBTQ plus community. Working within True Colors United for nearly a decade, Twiggy has led initiatives including the former 40 of the 40, a national list of resilient young people with lived experiences of homelessness. They understand the importance of inspiring hope and reducing the stigma experienced by LGBTQ plus and BIPOC youth, while giving them the opportunities to safely grow and learn within communities. Twiggy co-created TCU's National Youth Forum on Homelessness, a group of young people who experienced homelessness or housing disability and leveraged their stories to inform the national conversation on homelessness, national policy, and local practice. From the New York Times and the Hollywood Reporter to Out and The Advocate, Twiggy has received extensive visibility for their work as a runway trainer and performance artist. They served as a consultant and runway choreographer on Ryan Murphy's Emmy-nominated hit FX series Pose, and sit on the board of directors for Doc Society. With experience as a creative director, event producer, and cultural curator, they've collaborated with brands and organizations like Gucci, Coach, FX, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, GLAAD, AIDS Healthcare Foundation, Reebok, High Snobriety, and more. Twiggy is the overall overseer for the legendary International House of Comme des Garçons, the chief ambassador for the Center for Black Equity, and co-founder of All Tea No Shade Productions, alongside award-winning writer George M. Johnson. Twiggy is a former consulting programmer for Outfest, Newfest, and Outfest Fusion. And so, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ricky and Twiggy to the stage.
Hello, everybody. Hey, Twiggy.
Hello, hello. How are you, Ricky? How's your day?
I'm doing pretty well. Taught a class earlier, had a cheeseburger, so I'm feeling good.
Where'd you get your cheeseburger from, and what was the class?
Oh Lord, see now it's going to be a read because it was
I'm getting in your business now.
Burger King, and I can't deny. I was just in the city. I'm in Brownsville at some of my close friends' house, Nicole and Todd, and I was like, before this thing hits, I need a burger. So I just went and got me a double Whopper with cheese, nothing fancy. The class I teach at Lang is called Reading for Writers, American Gothic. So it's about the evolution of American Gothic as a genre and who's allowed to tell it, from Edgar Allan Poe all the way to our queen, Toni Morrison. So that was what was on my mind and in my mouth earlier tonight.
Interesting. Well, for those who don't know you very well, let's do the basics. Like, how long have you been writing? Where are you from? When did you start? Let's lay the groundwork before we dive into this brilliance that you just created.
Okay, yeah, I'm from North Carolina, and I was born in England, but that's a whole other story. But I grew up in North Carolina, ran away from home at 19, kind of hit the punk rock, like hipster scene in Boston for about a decade, read a lot, had a lot of fun. And then I went to the New School for my undergrad at late in life. I applied to the New School. I always knew I was a writer and kind of had been writing some of the time in Boston, but I officially like committed to it when I went to the New School for my undergrad for a writing program that was focused on writing and democracy. And the day that I hit, or the week that I hit New York City, $50 in my pocket, I went straight to the New School and just like started grabbing up all the free like orientation lunches that I could, trying to like get my grounding and trying to just, you know, put some foundation down. And I took a class. I mean, I went into a panel that was called "What Should I Register For?" I was like, okay, they've got a discussion about what to register for. And the first thing that popped up, brand new class called Voguology. And I signed up. I was like, well, this is me, because I saw Paris is Burning when I was about 21. And across that decade, it just was emblazoned into my head. And so I was like, Voguology, that's it. And that's where I met our common father, Michael Roberson, and then also Robert Timber. And then that's really when the research for the book started. And I just didn't know it until 10 years later.
Got it. So let's go back. When and how did you first discover the ballroom community, or did it discover you?
A little bit of both. The really first touch, like most people, was Vogue, like, you know, Madonna's Vogue, right? Like, I just remember, and I write about this a little bit in the book, I just remember being in my grandma's bathroom, and my mom and her friend Reggie, they were both from New York and stuck down in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, right? Because, you know, all us Black folks, you included, we got a North and we got a South, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was in the bathroom, and my mom's friend Reggie was gay. And as a matter of fact, I think he later joined Garçons, I believe. I know he's like involved in ballroom, but I think his house eventually was Garçon. But at the time, they were just both from New York and knew they'd been to Paradise Garage. My grandmother was a singer in New York City, so my mom had been at Studio 54 and all that stuff. And so they knew what the children were, and you know, and who they were. And when Vogue came onto the radio, he said to her, and I was watching them get ready to go to the club, he said to her, you know, Trix, like, can you believe what this woman is trying to do, right? This heifer is trying to do. He was talking about Madonna, you know, and my mom was like, yeah, she thinks she's one of the children now, you know, and that stuck in my head. So I knew, without having the language, I knew appropriation was a thing. And in that moment, I knew that there was something that might be ours that she thought was hers, right? And then I saw Paris is Burning when I was about 19 or 20, when I was living in Boston. My ex-boyfriend and I watched it. And then I was like, oh, well, there it is. I thought to myself, like, I didn't have the words and I didn't know it existed, but I knew it existed, and here it is. You know, like, this is the space where this radical thing, mostly what I was triggered by in a positive way, was how openly feminine everybody was able to be, because to me that was contraband, that was, you know, that was illegal. And so the thing that I had always wanted to do with my body in terms of dance, there had a space. And so so I was both, to be frank, I was kind of like, whoa, and then I was also like, finally, at the same time. And I think that's sort of like the crux of ballroom, is like, it's carrying a lot of dualities and paradoxes with it at the same time. And so really around then, so it was probably around like 2002 when I saw Paris is Burning. And then by the time 10 years later, like 8 years later, that I got to the New School, then I was like, well, I'm just going to keep looking into this. Yeah. So
you see this class named Voguology. What, I mean, if you could remember, like, what was the description of the course, and like what about that moment in that orientation made you join the class? And tell us a bit about how it went from almost a decade prior to this moment where you're like, oh, this is class I have to take, to leading you to this point.
The woman who was doing the whole conversation about what you should take, she was talking about Voguology in this very sort of like high wattage spotlight kind of way. She was like, this is our boutique course. And I was like, you don't have to tell me. I know what this course is about, you know? And then I saw the description, and it billed itself as half theory, half practice. So like, obviously everybody wants to learn how to Vogue, and that was sort of the candy bit of it. But the promise of the fact that there's going to be some medicine there, and it was like, you need to know where this comes from, really spoke to me. The critical theory is sort of part of it. And so when I got there, and it was, you know, Robert and Michael, who were sort of this yin and yang of like feelings and ideas and, you know, theory and practice, and theology and the secular world, like just they're both this thing. And I'm that complexity and that thoroughness of the subject matter really spoke to me, especially as a writer. Like, yeah.
Did you wrestle with writing a book about ballroom and not being a ball walker or competitor?
Yes, I have wrestled with being a friend of ballroom before because for the 10 years that I was taking the class and showing up at events, and I think you and I were both at GMAD with Michael for a while, getting free pizza on Tuesday nights, you know, like it was like, you know, I just, and what Robert said to me was like, you know, you love ballroom, you don't have to really figure out where you fit in, you just need to keep showing up, you know, and so I just kept showing up. I mean, as an amateur dancer, I've always kind of wanted to walk a ball, but I started being involved with folks in ballroom when I was 29, and that felt real over the hill to be starting walking a ball, you know. But the fact of the matter is that I'm a writer, and that's my contribution to the community. Like nobody's asking Mike Q to go Vogue, right? Like he's the DJ, he's the ballroom DJ. And when I talked to him for the book, never was he like conflicted about that. He was like, no, that's not what I do, you know. And it takes a community. If everybody walked a ball, there would be no MCs. There would be, you know, there would be no sort of peripheral threshold, you know. So I did feel that pressure as a friend of, because I felt like I needed to be something more than a clinger on. But the book never became an issue. And it's really remarkable to me, actually, that I never thought that it never occurred to me to write a ballroom book, I don't think, until somebody suggested it. And that was 10 years into my relationship with folks from ballroom. So really
that moment too, when you finished, like about that moment where someone was like, hey, how about you write this book?
And it was like, oh my God, duh, you know. And so while I was a student in New School, the first semester, first week, first term was like that class, Vogueology, and I was like, I'm just going to be in here. And then after that, I took every class Robert offered while I was a student there, because I was like, I need to stay around this man, you know. And then Michael was more stuff outside of the school, because he really only taught Vogueology there. So it was like I would go to GMAD stuff. He started going to Union Theological. If I caught wind of him doing a lecture, I was there. And I would bring my friend Ted. Ted's in the audience. Hey, Ted, he went to Union too. So I just kept up with them. But then, so eventually, this is about 2018, I started writing marketing for the New School. Because, you know, I'm good at marketing, but I can only peddle ideas. So I can sell education, but I can't sell Coca-Cola. And so I worked for the school, and they put me on, wanted me to help promote an initiative that nobody really knew how to work with. It was too radical, I guess, for them. And that was 400 Years of Inequality, which the organization which Michael is a committee member of, and then Robert is a co-founder of. So I was like, oh, you put me on the right project, you know. And so we helped them with marketing and stuff. And then eventually me and my friend Stephanie just stayed on and kept going to meetings in the middle of the day, because we just wanted to help with the initiative. And so when people like, I've been a writer for as long as I've been one, almost 15 years now, but really, like, my advice to everyone professionally is just take the projects that you're passionate about, because then things will come. If you're worried about I'm not afraid to be in ports of import my whole life. So money is never my issue. It's like, what is the project? You know, I could probably change that a little bit more these days, but it was the project. So I stayed on 400 Years well after I was supposed to. Michael finally caught wind of me being on it, and over an email exchange with the whole initiative on email. And he was like, is that my daughter, Ricky? And I was like, yes, it is, father. And so people were like, oh my God, like, you all know each other. And then my friend and a member of the coalition, Roisin Davis, is a literary agent. And she, like 2 weeks after the fact, she was like, I just saw this email chain. Would you or maybe Robert, anybody be interested in writing a book about ballroom? And that's when it dawned upon me. So like that was like 2018, 19. I took Vogueology in 2011, and it literally never occurred to me before. I mean, I got Michael's permission to do Vogue workshops at the school and at writing conferences. And even though I was doing a Vogue workshop in Seattle and Washington at an all writers conference, it never occurred to me to make that intersection. Like, it was just like, I'm doing what I love to do, and I'm going to present it to these stuffy nerds, right? And like, it was just that. It never occurred to me until someone said, write a book about ballroom. And I was like, obviously, I think that's, and also I looked around, like, has nobody else done this really? Like Marlon Bailey did Butch Queen Up in Pumps. And people have written, they have done photography books and like coffee table books, but it never been a holistic book about the culture, or rather like a book about New York scene, which is the genesis of ballroom, really. And so so I kept looking around for it and it wasn't happening. And then someone asked me and I was like, well, okay, you know, and I was confident enough in my writing ability that by that point that it just seemed like it was going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Shout outs to one of the books, Legendary by Gerard Gaskin. Everyone check it out. It's a beautiful photography book. You have a lot of love from Stephanie, from Kareem, Ted, all saying hi in the audience. I will also encourage the audience to use the Q&A feature for those who are joining us from Zoom. We will have an audience Q&A at the end of this, but I have quite a bit more to get through with Ricky. That's a good idea, actually. So I guess you got us to the decision. What was your process for figuring out how you would structure the chapters? Because the chapters are so carefully curated. So like, how did you end up there with it being these conversations with legends, icons, affiliates, et cetera? Like, how did you get there in the process?
So, so as soon as we decided it was going to be a thing that we would pitch to the publishers, it was like, okay, well, what's the table of contents going to be? And that, and my end of that is like, where's the fun going to be? So, you know, and I knew that it would be glossy on the front, like the cover. I mean, as it stands, the cover is gorgeous. The name is well written, if I do say so myself, but it is not all fun and games, just like ballroom, right? And I knew that I would kind of lure people in with a spoonful of sugar to help the really well-needed medicine down, right? Like, so like to get the social theory across to it and why ballroom is so dire and fills such a void in the culture and in our lives, right? So I knew that all of the experiences I had in Vogueology, or just knowing that like everything is double-edged when it comes to ballroom, especially in pop culture, I knew that everybody needed to know that. So I staged everything as a category as if you're going to walk it, most of them. I mean, like the memory chapter is really just an appeal to make an archive for ballroom, but you know, there's a Vogue chapter, there's a realness chapter, there's a body chapter. And so I knew I'm really okay with making seemingly disparate connections. And so when, you know, if I say body for walking a category, I knew that I would be talking about healthcare, you know, healthcare, metabolizing bodily trauma, right? Intergenerational trauma that happens on a cellular level. And so I knew every fun category that is walked on in this table of contents is going to be something that you are going to learn. So I set up that table of contents, and then I was like, okay, well, now I need the people. And so I literally handed the table of contents to Robert, and I was like, do you know people who would be good and correlate with each of these chapters? And he was like, let me talk to Michael, I'll get back to you soon. And within a week they had it back to me, and I was like, I know most of these people, and this is going good, you know, like it worked. It's so organic. It was so organic, and I couldn't have done it without them or you or all the people that are in the book. Like it just happened so naturally that I know that like it's going to do well just because it's done with such love and it came together almost on its own in this way.
Yeah. Thank you for that, and I'm honored to be asked to be a part of it. I'm wondering, throughout all of those conversations and those interviews, and what was your aha moment? What was something unexpected that came up? And you can say more than one if you want, but I'm just curious because you have known us and you know the people in it throughout the years, and so I'm like, well, what was the thing that you're like, oh wait, what's this thing? You know, what was that moment for you?
There's a few of them. I mean, one of them, and some of them are no-brainers, but it just surprised me how true they were. Like how much of a linchpin of this community Michael Roberson is. When I was talking about, like, you know, he makes you feel like he's just talking to you, even if he's in a giant crowd, you know. And a lot of the times when I'm getting emotional already, oh my God, like, but like hearing him speak is like so riveting, and it's always on a personal level. And so often when he's making that parallel between theology and Vogueology, or theology and ballroom, I feel like he's just talking to me. And so when I spoke to you and you were like, well, my father had me know, and you just went through all the things and about, you know, growing up in Virginia and having the church be such an integral part of your life, and then it not being, you know. And so like, and what ballroom does in terms of filling that void, or just having us look at it differently, look at religion differently, and the parallels, you know, those obvious things where the DJ is the choir director, and you know the congregation is the people in the audience, and the Voguers might be the choir, and the MC is the pastor, like all of, and house music is the gospel, like that. That it surprised me how much Michael really sort of put that out in all four corners of ballroom, and everybody knew what I was talking about when I brought it up, and there was a yes and with that every single time. Another thing is just Gia Love is, I went with Robert for a while, Robert Zimber, to Harvey Milk to go to Hetrick Martin to just sort of hang out with the Kiki kids and figure out who they were and help them figure out who they were and just be in those conversations. And to see Gia just turn into this goddess, which by the way, Gia and Gaia is the goddess of earth, right? Like Gia has turned into that, you know, and it's so beautiful to see people actualized in that way. So to see her be an activist, which is not too much of a surprise because that's what Hetrick Martin does, you know, but to see her just be this goddess, and for her to bring in new ideas into the book. So when I interviewed her, she said, you know, like, I'm tired of this sort of professional and life development through these not-for-profits focusing on HIV prevention. What about my joy, right? What about the fact that I am a really good tennis player, you know? And this is what Gia said, and it's amazing because I didn't know that about her. Or I did know this about her, that she was an award-winning debater in high school. You know? So that was sort of a moment, that was a North Star for me for the book, where it was like, okay, right, you know, let's talk about the not-for-profit industrial complex. Let's talk about HIV prevention to a certain degree, but what about everybody's joy, you know? Making it a little bit more joy-centered. So I learned a ton. I really learned a ton. I asked more questions than I thought I would, and I didn't get as many answers as I thought, but I'm okay with having more questions than you started out with. Like that's kind of the goal. Yeah.
I love that. And shout outs to Gia Love for all those. Gia's my goddaughter, so I have to shout her out. She's a model, she's an activist, she's an orator, she's a debater, she's a tennis player, she's an athlete, she's all of the things. There's no shame. Follow her, love.gia on Instagram. I could go on and on, but I'm going to keep this is about Gia, so I'm going to bring it back. You mentioned something earlier, the ongoing topic about ballroom and its relationship to capitalism and elitism and whiteness and appropriation. And I want to know what are your thoughts on ballroom and appropriation, especially in this moment where it's seeming, you know, for me, it is no longer a subculture. It's no longer underground. People keep saying that and using those that language, and it's like, no, we're here. We're not going anywhere. Pose might be done. Legendary is still happening. We are not going to. We haven't gone anywhere. We've been here, right? And these sort of ups and downs of the mainstreaming moments of ballroom, right? And so I'm curious of your thoughts on that, especially from a perspective as a writer and author.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I've talked about this a couple of times this week, but it's, you know, like I don't get direct entry because I'm Black and gay, right? Like my whether or not I'm appreciating or appropriating is a constant question that I am having to answer and negotiate. And so, you know, I don't automatically get a ticket. So then you bring in white voyeurs and like, what does that mean? So I think it's mostly important, and that's not going to stop. I mean, in my research, I looked into like the balls that like Langston Hughes went to, those drag balls, the Odd Fellows up in the lodges in Harlem. And in those news coverage of them, it's like, there was 1,500 people, 2/3 of them were white people from downtown coming to look at this, right? So like, it's this weird symbiosis not weird. It's an American symbiosis. That's always what happens with folks of color, particularly Black folks in white America. That's what it is, right? But like, so in a way, it's not that different. But the fact that we're asking these questions more and more gives me faith. Also, the prototype changes, you know, the appropriation that we saw and appreciation that we saw with Madonna isn't the partnerships that we've had with Ryan Murphy for Pose, right? Like there's been some sort of growth that you can track, or at least awareness on the ends of both folks, right? So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's all, we have to be vigilant. We have to be vigilant. And I couldn't start the book any other way other than taking Madonna to task and coming for her, right?
Yeah.
But it's complex and I still don't have the definitive answer. It's both things because that video for Vogue is beautiful. Like, it's David Fincher directed it and it's black and white and it's gorgeous. However, the bridge of the song has only old white straight people in it. So like, you know, and so so in the beginning of the book too, I take that sort of bridge section with the Greta Garbo's and all those, and I put in ballroom legends to not to reset or to brownwash that whitewash that was so obvious to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. If I go to my next question, I see a few questions coming in, but I want to encourage those who are joining us that are able to drop questions in the Q&A. Please use the Q&A features because I'm going to come to you in just a bit. Our father always gives these infamous lectures about ballroom having something to say. And so what has ballroom said to you?
Ballroom has said to me that ballroom is a large collective and always here, right? Has always been here and always will be here. Ballroom has said to me that we are whole people that need to be observed as much, and that struggle isn't just the story, and freedom isn't just the story. It's those things that are intrinsically linked. Just like Frederick Douglass said, without struggle, there is no progress, and it's both those things. They're the same foot. What else has ballroom said to me? That we have a generational trauma as Black and brown folks that doesn't stop just because we have ballroom as a safe space, because there are dangers within ballroom too.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to Luna Luis Ortiz, who also was one of the 3 photographers for the book. And Luna and I sat down by the piers and just sort of talked about how serious the generational trauma is. And particularly with that narrative about HIV/AIDS, it's like, we're in this point where it's a livable disease. And so a lot of folks who were told they were going to die are living with PTSD, which, you know, Luna shared with me in our interview. Like, Luna was like, you know, like, it's really hard for me to let go of the idea that I was going to die. And that's all they told me. And now I still live with that. Like, that's trauma. But I do have some sort of, in terms of collective recovery, I looked into that in the body section of the book, and there are ways in which voguing is a means of metabolizing bodily trauma, specifically racial bodily trauma for Americans, you know? And so there are a lot of cool, I mean, there might be a follow-up to this book just because there's so many ideas that I kind of knocked on that, especially working with 400 Years of Inequality, my mind was very much in the framework of collective recovery. And in a lot of instances, because I was working on that in my spare time, writing the book, ballroom just seemed like a way of recovering collectively. And I think it is.
I have another question similar to that, but before that, for our audience, those watching live and those who watch this later, say a bit more about what you mean by metabolizing trauma. I get it, but you know, let's take it there a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, so on a very surface level, when I talk to Genovia Chase, like, Genovia doesn't walk Vogue. Genovia's done like Runway and maybe Realness and some other categories, but she doesn't do Vogue. But what she said to me was, you know, like, yeah, at Vogue sometimes, like before a business meeting or something, I'll go into the bathroom and serve a little something. And that makes me know that I'm that girl, so that when I go into the meeting, like, they can't touch me. And like, you know, and I've gotten the question a couple of times where it's like, how is voguing part of your writing practice? And I'm like, yes, like, it's hard to translate, like, you know, like, I vogue and then that's a sentence, like, it's not that direct, but right. But it definitely is, like, if I'm writing something where I'm like, I'm about to cut you, like, that's what I will be doing. Right. And like, and so, and it's just as much as my practice is like walking to sort of get the wheels turning, or taking a break, or sitting up, you know, like, it is. And so it's just being aware of your body. I mean, I think all of us who are in New York or on the East Coast, we, you know, like, we're all going to therapy, and a lot of the sort of like the in vogue sort of like methodologies are processing how you feel from head to toe, right? Bodily awareness and mindfulness, right? And thoughtfulness. And I think voguing is a shortcut to that. That's a lot of what it is, just being aware of your space, right? Like, it's that. So on a surface level, but then also sitting with your body and knowing it. And if you do that as a collective, what power does that have? Like that can be profound in its ability to change the way in which you see and feel trauma, you know? And then that just turns voguing and breakdancing groups into collective recovery teams, right? Like it's like we have a collective trauma as a culture, and we're using our bodies to transcend that. So that's kind of that's kind of the most of the questions I asked. I didn't answer anything, but like that is an exciting sort of offshoot of where I like towards the end of the book, I ended up there with the body chapter, and I was really excited.
Yeah, I absolutely love that way of seeing it. Similar to the question I was actually, just another reminder for those watching, ask some questions because I'm coming to you. I got 2 more, maybe 3 more questions for Ricky and myself, and then let's go to the Q&A. But what does Ballroom say in this moment in particular? Because Ballroom has said many things to the world over the century, but in this moment, what do you think Ballroom is saying to the world?
I think, I think the whole thesis of the book can be sort of boiled down to what Benji Hart was talking to me and Robert Simber about, and Pony Zion. Like Benji was like, if you can't, and I'm just paraphrasing from the book, but Benji was like, if you can't appreciate Black and queer and brown folks when we're walking down the street, then like don't have us come vogue at your function, right? If you are enabling discrimination and hate crimes and really the death of a people, then don't try to saddle up to me at a party because you know I can dance. And don't try to have me at your function, right? Don't hire me if you can't do that. And then so the other end of that is maybe we don't need folks to hire us, right? I mean, you and I were just sort of talking about a cool project that you and Michael and Genovia are working on. And I'm like, just even the idea that like you all are running the show, right? And we'll all need funding and stuff, but like you all are running the show is like, I can see in not even just my lifetime, in the matter of 4 years, that narrative shifting dramatically, you know? So it's in there. I mean, Bell Hooks talks about being an enlightened witness to these transactions, and she actually took Madonna to task well before like I or anybody else did. She wrote a whole paper about it, and she was basically like, "This bitch, y'all watch out," right? Like this is what she was saying, and so it's not that these transactions aren't going to happen anymore. Thank you very much. I'm gonna need to borrow that. It's not that these transactions aren't going to happen anymore, because that's just as delusional as thinking capitalism is just going to fall because we want it to. Right. But it's like, how do we get better about being aware of what is about to happen? And how can we like imagine? And now, because we don't really have to imagine, how can we sort of foresee where these transactions are going to go and where they will end in terms of our generational development? And so that's sort of it. It's like, if you can't appreciate us, then don't come to the party. We'll have the party for ourselves. That's what I was hearing across the book, generally.
Yeah, again, you said something about generational development, and I was originally going to ask about your inner child and what it would have meant for you to have encountered ballroom at a younger age, and yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know. I'm really about like, I was the right writer at the moment. I came to terms with my like femininity at the right moment, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I don't have any regrets for that, but I do think that I ended up writing the book that I might have needed. Yeah. When I was a kid, right? Like all of this information that we have now would have been real handy 30 years ago. Yeah. You know, but everything in its time. But it would have been, I don't know, North Carolina was interesting. Like I transcended friend groups. Sure. And so, but being a little bit more secure with my demographic would have been would have happened a lot quicker if I had ballroom in my life. But also, I don't know. I mean, would I have been walking balls? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know.
Balls, girl.
I probably would have. You're right. I'm trying not to have any regrets, but you're actually right. See, here you come. This is what's going to happen.
Regret. You would have.
I'm going to be 40, premiering at a ball, walking down the runway, because this is where this book is leading to. I'm just going to be walking. That's okay. All right. Y'all heard it here first. Twiggy said,
remember it happened here first. Thank you, Strand. My last question before I go to the audience questions are, when someone closes this book, what do you want them to have experienced?
I want them to feel like they're at a ball. I do. Like, I don't want it to just be like social theory and like, screw capitalism, although it is. Like, the mandate was, it is definitely unapologetically Black, and it is very much an indictment of capitalism. Like, my two gay fathers asked me to write, right? They asked me to do that thing, and I did it. But I also want them to know, like, I want them to feel like I'm talking to them. I want them to know that they aren't alone. And I want them to know that there's a lot to the story. This is and it's an important story. And also, I want the Schomburg to do an archive of Ballroom. And so I have a book signing with them in the middle of the month, and I'm going to have folks. Lee Soldier is going to be there, and folks are going to be there in the front row, and I'm going to ask them, like, when is that happening?
Yeah.
So
let's talk about that offline, because there's
I know.
Yeah.
I just want to tear the whole thing down. I'm like, just everybody get it together. I'm sorry, you're right.
Well, no, just there's some things like that in development. I don't know about there, but no, I don't know about there, but let's talk, because we're on Strand's time. Let's go to the audience. The first question is, where's the contemporary ballroom scene in New York City? Where do I go?
Say that one more time, Twiggy.
Where is the contemporary ballroom scene in New York City? Where do I go?
All over. I mean, the balls that I've been to have been all over the place, from Harlem to the Bronx. Like, I was at the one that's most featured in the book that my friend Kareem photographed was from the Escape from Arkham ball, which was just basically all of the villains. It was a Kiki ball. Kiki balls are the ones that really be popping off like every month or so. Brooklyn Expo, we got some photos from there. So because Ballroom, and Kiki in particular, is sort of is dovetailed with public health. A lot of the times it's sponsored at very particular places by New York New York Health Department. So Brooklyn Expo has them all the time too. I mean, Twiggy, you have connections to Kiki, obviously. What you know where they are?
They're all over, and I feel like in conversations like this, I'm not interested in telling everyone.
Word. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Leave us alone.
I think there's, my personal thoughts are that there are some balls that are open to folks who are not in ballroom, and then I think there are balls that are much more sacred,
Right.
and only for us in ballroom. And so I think if you're meant to discover it, or for it to discover you will, and we'll leave that at that.
And I am that is amazing. That's amazing. And also, if you want a watered down Trainer Wheels ball, they used to have one at House of Yes. Have fun at that one, right? Because that's the open sort of one, right?
I will shout out my girlfriend, OTA. Her events are, OTAs every Monday. It's giving come on, come all. That's why it's OTA, open to all the girls come and get their life in Brooklyn. You could definitely look it up and figure out where it is very easily. So do go to OTA. The next question is Langston Hughes. How long has Ballroom been around?
So wait, so the question had Langston Hughes in it, or the person's name is
Langston? I think they were responding when you mentioned Langston Hughes earlier, and they're like, oh wow, how long has Ballroom been around?
Generally 150 years is around the frame of time that most people say. The late 1800s is where we have some actual documentation and like news coverage of balls that on the fence, sort of reverent, and then also kind of shady, but that's just any queer sort of event that you had, that's how it was covered. Langston Hughes, in his book Big C, it's his autobiography, sort of broken up into sections. He writes about a ball, which there's this whole thing in his sort of historical literary circles about whether or not he was gay or not. And there's documentation in every other direction, or in every direction all over the place. You could say he was queer, bi, whatever. But the way that he talked about ballroom and those drag balls by the Oddfellows in the 20s, the way he talked about it in his autobiography. So you think about that, like, why would somebody put that in their autobiography unless it was really pertinent to something? The way he was talking about the older queens was so shady that I feel like he was at least culturally a ballroom, because he was calling them old queens that need to hang it up, and the young ones, and like, he was just going in. And so Langston Hughes was a shady bitch, and he was back there then.
Period. That's that on that.
Period.
Our next question. Could you talk about your first time voguing?
First time voguing? I don't even know when. Well, I do know that, like, I don't know my first time voguing, because that's like, when was the first time you did a hand gesture? It's like, I don't know, but Like when was the first time you were cunty with your movements? It's like the womb. But I do know that I do know that I put more attention to it when I was working at Northeastern University, and I had access as a staff member. This is in Boston, but right before I moved here to go to school, and I was able to check out a ballet studio, a dance studio once or whenever I wanted to, but I did it every Friday. And that's really when I started paying attention to my body a lot more, and feeling free in this space where it was just rented for me, a giant space with ballet bars and lined with mirrors and a sound system to really explore femininity in a safe space at 6:30 in the morning before I went into work. And so, and I even got busted at one point by a young queer kid who was like looking at me through the doors. I knew that he was like, that was his, it's safe to be that moment, you know? But it took me 25 some odd years to get to the point where I could get into a room and be femme and that be okay. But my go-to song was Throb by Janet Jackson. And that is the cuntiest song on earth. And that's that song in that moment in 2007, 2008, that's when I was like, oh, I might be a little bit of a voguer.
Yeah. We love Janet. Everyone, please watch it out this weekend. Someone asked, what's something Ballroom taught you about yourself and about your own community?
That I had more of one, you know. I came from North Carolina, and I was always an odd man out, you know, like a lot of my girlfriends were straight white girls, you know, and I was in a gifted class, and because of the way that everything is stratified in terms of class and race, there wasn't very many people that looked like me there, and there weren't very many people that were queer like me there. And so it took leaving that state at the age of 19 to even have my first Black gay friend of my age, right? Family members, of course. My mom, a couple of members of my family are in recovery. And so there were a lot of gay older mentors there. But I think a lot of them also didn't feel like North Carolina was the place to be. So there was a lot of muted queerness there. But one of my best friends now, when I met him when I was 19, Kareem, he's a Black gay man. And so from that point, leaving North Carolina forward, it started to feel more and more okay. And then seeing Paris is Burning, it's like, oh, there I am. And then Michael Roberson. I mean, I was talking to Michael the other day, our gay father. I was talking to him the other day, and he was like, he's thinking about working at Yale. And he was talking to some of their students, and they were Black students. And they came up to him afterwards, and they're like, we really hope you work here because we've never had a Black gay professor. And I'm on the phone talking to him about this. And I was like, that's incredible. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm like, are you sure? I'm like, at Yale, but of course at Yale. I'm like, at Yale? And he's like, mm-hmm. And I was like, well, actually, you know, come to think of it, you're my first Black gay teacher. And I was 30. So Ballroom gave me versions of myself to talk to, like in a lot of different ways. And that doesn't mean I haven't ever been an outsider, because also, again, I don't walk balls. So I was sort of out in another way, you know, hovering around in another way. But the what it did for me in terms of representation and showed me what a scholar could look like was revelatory.
Yeah, not oddly enough, in alignment, actually, I'll be explicit. Kareem asked you that question. So
okay. Well, he was in the answer. That's yeah.
The next question, and we got a few, so let me just actually go a little faster. How can a person not just outside of Ballroom, but also outside queer culture, honor and appreciate Ballroom with respect and love?
Just be thoughtful. Don't take up, I mean, space is a real thing. The physics of being at a ball and taking up a lot of space, that matters. Like I've told the story before, but it's like me and Kareem, and Kareem went to that ball in the Bronx with me. I took my niece, my nephew from North Carolina, and a young student friend of mine. Everybody was Black, 3 of us were queer. And before we walked in, I had to say, everybody be respectful of the space. And everybody was like, I know. And I was like, no, you don't, because I'm still saying it. Don't elbow it. This isn't our room. You know, you can be fascinated, you can have fun, but just watch your space. So I think physical space is sort of underestimated sometimes. Like you need to respect the space, sacredly and physically, right? But also I'll say what Robert told me is just like, keep showing up, you know, like be consistent. Don't just show up for like one big extravaganza and then just like never show up again and be like, oh, I know what ballroom is. Like, if you actually want to be part of a community, whether that be in terms of a new neighborhood, if you don't want to be a gentrifier, talk to the man at the bodega every day, and in a way that isn't condescending and in a way that is regular. And the ritual, that physical ritual, is another way that we can metabolize the trauma that is separatism, because it doesn't exist. Regularity is that answer. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on, Twiggy, go ahead.
No. Ate that. And this one's a doozy. It's a long one. It's a really good one. Ricky, you write in the preface, first off, this book, and I quote, first off, this book is not the end all be all historical Bible on all things ballroom, end quote. Within the first half of the book, you show multiple members of the ballroom community leading multiple projects to collect the history of ballroom, both oral and tangible. Does ballroom need a historical Bible? And if so, how can readers in and out of the community contribute to that effort?
I think that comes down to logistics. It's like a digital archive question, and that comes down to funding and sort of cultivating all of this information. So you need a center, you know. That's why we were sort of calling for the Schomburg to do it, but that it definitely doesn't have to be the Schomburg. It just needs to be one central location. Ballroom is so big now, and that's the other thing in that preface. I said that because like New York is so specific, and though it's the starting off point of ballroom, debatably, it's not all of ballroom. Ballroom's in Scotland now, right? So like, and in Paris, so like in Brazil. And so it's impossible to write the book that I said I was not going to write. And that's part of the reason I didn't write it, you know. But also that preface is like, don't at me. Like, you know, like if you're like, I'm not in this book, I'm ballroom, like you don't, that's fine. Because this book isn't about you. It's about my family, right? And so so it can't be everything to everybody, but I do think somebody needs to come up with the money and the space and the time and the digital access to make an archive of ballroom, because, you know, materials are deteriorating.
Yeah, I will name explicitly our father and Robert have worked on the Arbor Santana Oral Archive History Project and continue to build that out. But I agree, a physical, tangible space is the least that we could do for what ballroom has contributed to culture. So the next question is, how do you think ballroom will evolve now that it's more mainstream and with social media?
I mean, the social media part is already kind of part of it. I went through there's a chapter called The Children, and it's about sort of how people find ballroom. And I asked every single person that I talked to in the book, how did you find ballroom? And I also told my story, you know, but and the answer ended up being in these sort of like pockets that happen with everyone. And one of them is like, I saw people voguing on YouTube, right? So like, you know, social platforms aren't a brand new part of ballroom. I mean, my Q saw something on social, like a chat room, you know, went into a chat room, and that's where he knew in Jersey to go DJ, and that's where he saw people voguing for the first time. So social doesn't really change that. It just sort of is already part of the status quo.
Yeah.
But how is it changing? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think you might be able to answer that more, Twiggy, because you're like, I remember what you said to me, and this is actually a change. And this was another one of those breakthroughs where I was like, yes, there's something happening, is when you said, you know, when you were younger, they told you that you could never put ballroom on your resume, and you said you wanted to change that, and now that is what you do, right? It is your resume. So so like I think that is sort of the big change. But like what do you attribute that to? Is it just time? Like how come what's the difference now that is your work, is your profession?
I think just the commitment and dedication of so many people whose backs and shoulders I've stood on that have done that groundwork. Not necessarily around the mainstreaming piece, but just that have been unapologetic about ballroom being innately a part of who they are. And that has taught me to do the same thing in every space I occupy. And so I think it really is about that more than it is about the mainstream opportunities that have come up. I think how it will evolve, who knows? I think it will continue to grow and spread, and there will be ballroom communities and scenes that continue to emerge all around the world. I would like to see more intentional resources poured into the community in really intentional ways, so that we as a ballroom community can make a physical space for archive, right? And such. And I could go on and on because that's a very loaded question. And
it's like you got a crystal ball. Like, who knows? You know, who knows?
Listen, a lot of things can happen, but we're gonna manifest some intention around those things. We have about 10 minutes left, a little bit less than 10 minutes. So I'm going to blaze through these next ones. I'm going to skip this one because it's better to do this one later. But what impact do you think shows like Pose and Legendary will have on the next generation of ballroom?
I mean, representation is everything. I mean, it's just simple as seeing somebody like you on TV. I mean, and they do it in different flavors. I mean, Pose isn't everything, you know, but the major accomplishment is that there were people from ballroom behind the camera like yourself, and there were people from ballroom on camera too, some not, and then MJ getting the Golden Globe. I mean, that if there was ever a tiara to be placed on the head about that show, is that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's, again, like my book, it's not the end all be all of ballroom. It can't be everything. I mean, like I've said this a couple of times, it's a telenovela. Like, it's like, but to Gia's point, you know, with the holistic sort of development of folks in ballroom and the culture, then we get to have a TV show that's kind of corny and dramatic and hilarious at times. Like, it doesn't have to be Paris is Burning. It's something else, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And same thing with Legendary. Like, that show is, it's like the America's Next Top Model of ballroom on TV, you know, and it's on HBO. So that's even bigger league than a UPN, right? That Tyra was on, right? And so, but it's not the show that you go to really, really critically learn about the culture. It's about who did this the best under bright lights, you know? So, so diversity and representation, I think, is really good for everybody, but I don't think there's any detrimental effect to that whatsoever. It's more just sort of like, keep them coming, like, you know?
Yeah. I have three more. This one's loaded, so blaze through it, and then I'm going to ask you one about you, and then we're going to end with a fun one. What would you say is the connection between drag and ballroom? Are they closely related?
It's a Venn diagram that sometimes is just a sliver of a thing, and sometimes it's a circle, and it's not all. I think that sort of hinge in the middle often is the vernacular that is, I would think, borrowed from ballroom to go over to drag. So a lot of the language is the same. Ballroom was started through drag performance and drag balls, right? And so there is that inherently. There's a pageantry to drag that isn't always in ballroom. Ballroom's more kinetic, you know, so they are starting to do spins and dips in drag, but that is a key element of ballroom. So so there are a lot of differences to me. I mean, one can be very cartoonish, but they all are made up. And I can name differences all day, but they aren't the same. I mean, my mom, bless her heart, she's like, when she heard about the book and stuff, she was like, have you interviewed Bob the drag queen yet? And I'm like, I was like, yes, but no, you know, like, I haven't interviewed Bob. I want to, and that would be handy in a very narrow crawl space, but no, I'm not going to do that, you know? But I would love for Bob to blurb the book, but then Bob isn't ballroom, Bob is drag, you know? So they're cousins, they're close cousins. They grew up maybe in the same house, they got the same grandma, but it's not the same person.
Yeah, thanks for saying. Oh, for anyone watching, it is Dip. It is not a death drop. We will continue to make sure that everyone knows that. What's next for Ricky Tucker? How do you think your experience writing about ballroom will inform your future writing practice and projects?
Well, I think that I've always thought of my writing as both a trade. So I feel like a plumber, you know, like if you got a word problem, I'll get my suitcase full of letters and I'll be right over there, right? So it's a trade, but it's also an art form and an act of service. I don't do art without it helping somebody. And so even in my advertising work, it's like 400 years of inequality. It's the new school. It's St. Francis College. Like I want to fortify people with what my gift is. And so so this book about ballroom has set a template for that. So my next book is about, I've already started working on it in a couple of residencies, one in Virginia, and it's about a queer representation on television and how certain documentaries and docuseries like Disclosure and Celluloid Closet are talking about talking about being queer and represented on television as an inherently bad thing in the past, which is not necessarily wrong, but from where I was coming from as a latchkey kid who's watched way too much television, I saw it everywhere. You know, I saw your Paul Lenz on Bewitched, your Uncle Arthur's being gay as hell and nobody talked about it. I saw a vacuum on A Different World, one of my favorite TV shows, in The Cosby Show, where nobody was gay, but I knew better. right? And so that'll be fun to sort of like reimagine gay characters on a different world. So I'll be doing that. So I'll rewrite a script with maybe Lena being the gay character. And don't get me started on designing women and just how like it wasn't written by gay men, but it's the voice of this Southern gay man. So it'll just be and Ricky from My So-Called Life, on and on and on and on. So it's called it's called, but they did do that on television, Queer Dispatches in the Golden Age of Entertainment. So that's where I'm working. That's what I'm working on now. And that is an act of public service to young queer people who don't think they see themselves or thought they didn't see themselves, where I beg to differ. And then the next book might be just navel gazing art criticism, who knows? But I like to help people with ideas.
Yeah. Last fun question, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Sabir, who also just, obviously, if you have not purchased the copy of, and the category is, the link is in the chat. Last question, when was the last time you caused a scene?
That's Stephanie Kim, I know that question.
Yes, it is.
Okay, Lord have mercy. When was the last time I caused a scene? Oh, I caused a scene over Christmas because I have an adorable little nephew named John, and he was being bullied. And my mom is from New York. She's from Brooklyn. She was born in '63, so she's hardcore, don't fuck with me and mine when it comes to bullying. And John was telling us about it, and she said to him, I'm gonna tell you like I told the rest of them, there is no bullying. If you get hit out there, don't come crying to me. Go out there and whip his ass. And I'm like, I get the sentiment of that advice, but it's horrible advice. And I kind of caused a scene about it. I was like, don't. And my mom was like, Ricky stands up to bullying. I was like, don't attach my name to that shit. Like I was very much just like, no, like, and then I calmed down and I told John that he can come to crying to me about anything, so I rectified it. I didn't cause a full on scene, but it was bubbling. Like it was about to be half a scene, girl. Like it was, yeah, I don't like that advice.
Stephanie must know you call scenes.
She's the one to talk.
Listen, well, Stephanie, let's talk offline. Thank you, Ricky. This was such a pleasure. Thank you to the Strand for having us for this event, and it's been an honor.
Thank you so much for making this happen, Twiggy, and thank you, Sabir, for putting it all together.
Oh my God, no, thank you both. That conversation was amazing. 150 years, I had no idea. But
yeah, that we know of.
And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you have yet to purchase a copy of And the Category Is, there's a link in the chat. Ricky will be coming in to sign them, so you'll be able to get a signed copy. And on that note, thank you again, Ricky and Twiggy, for just such a fun conversation. And I hope everyone has a fantastic evening. Good night.
Twiggy, keep an eye out for your book.
I will. I'm waiting.
All right, it's coming. Give it till tomorrow. It'll be there, I promise.
Mm-hmm.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.